Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and I'm doing the second installment of the book by Phil Langdon called On the Origins of Gnosis, a chapter 2 that is being silence and thought. And again, my channel is Discerning What is True. That is on YouTube channel, that is. And today is the 21st day of September 2023. So I'm going to be reading from this particular book here, which is simply On the Origins of Gnosis. Quote from the Bible, the King James Version, that is. Be still and know that I am God. December is a cool season in Southeast Asia, so it was pleasantly warm and tranquil walking along the causeway, heading into Angkor Wat. Hold on just a second. I want to do something a bit, change something here with the background. Make it a little bit easier for me to read. The Kimmel Temple to the Hindu god Vishnu in the Cambodian jungle. There's a sense of grounded stillness in the main temple area, as though it is a timeless domain. Within moments, my mind's eye was filled with a meditating figure that appeared as a life-size statue of a monk, as it was manifesting a few feet in front of me, but could not be seen physically. It was such a strong image that I could tell it was a bronze and had the traditional Cambodian look to it, with a curling flame all the way around its body, coming to a point at the top of the head. For some reason, there was also a white circle of light on his forehead, about 3 centimeters wide. In just 3 minutes, the vision was so strong it became more real and entrancing to me than my physical surroundings. As I looked around the circle of light on his forehead, it was producing 4 things at the same time. There were white, regular space radiating circular waves at a frequency of about 3 every second that would reach the outer perpetual vision in 1 second. Between each ring were 8 equally spaced, fainter looking rings rippling outwardly. The other 2 things coming off the light were entirely different. That is, there was what looked like plasma type material continuously pouring off to either side of the circle that looked exactly like material that comes off the sun in a corona mass injections. But this material seemed to come away gently, unlike the violent eruptive material that comes from the sun. The last thing was a thin outer ring immediately around the center circle of light that would suddenly and randomly brighten and dim in intensity, like an irregular strobe, reminding me of the random flickering around the sun when viewed at sunset. All this carried on in a complete silence. Then I turned my attention to the light itself, which was pure, brilliant white, glazing directly into it, and wondering about the nature. It occurred to my general sense of understanding that it was perfectly still white light. I lost track of time. A moment later, it felt as though I had floated down to the level of peace and complete calm in myself that bottomed out as perfectly still. Time did not mean the same in this awareness, like a veil was removed to reveal a different eternal presence moment in which all is well. As I looked around, there was someone distinctly present with me in the stillness who seemed to be spread out everywhere all at once. I also had the distinct impression I was in an immense garden full of paths that curled around behind the hedgerows, the shrubs and trees, and opened out into the groves with wondrous points of interest in each one, not unlike Central Park in New York. The person I felt was present everywhere at once in this peaceful place seemed to relate to the garden as if they were the great gardener and owner of the vast estate. The all-encompassing presence then seemed to focus itself at the point of my gaze. As I was looking into the sky, we became fully aware of each other. When this happened, the presence instantly came out of the sky, directly to a position next to me, as a person would be standing. There was nothing to look at physically, but I seemed to know what this person was doing once I looked as I locked onto them. Then as if walking casually, the spirit moved directly towards me, and I became aware of the sense of being lifted into the sky, reaching the sense of feeling weightlessness in 5 seconds. As I felt deeply in love with this never-ending, gentle spirit, all sense of body weight disappeared and was immediately followed by the sensation of an icy cold flame, transparent with blue fringes in the center of my chest, rising to the throat of the next few seconds, whose fullness lasted for 9 hours. After an hour in this blissful state, I was driven down the road to the entrance at the outer wall of an enclosed next door called Angkor Thom. That's Thom. Walking into the large area within the enclosed reveals 3 temples, one of which is called Bayon, Bayon, and is the strangest temple building I ever seen. There are 17 pillars at Bayon, each with 4 6-foot-high faces carved around them, facing all 4 directions from their square columns at the upper floor level of the temple. At one point, while standing in front of one of these faces, there was a sudden and quick physical sensation in the center of my head. The 2 small surfaces rubbing together. It startled me and brought my attention quickly to the inside of my head, thinking something unusual and perhaps worrying had just happened to my brain. As my attention shifted, what looked like a bubble of shiny black oil was in the process of growing from a tiny point in the center of my mind's eye view, about 2 feet in front of me at eye level. The bubble slowly expanded for 2 to 3 seconds before detaching and immediately bursting. In its wake was a word written in 3-dimensional, tall, pure white English capital letters. The word was "you." As I registered this word in disbelief, it faded and was followed quickly by another black bubble, which also burst to reveal the next word, R, A-R-E. Eventually, 12 of these bubbles came out of the same point, one after the other, all bursting to finally reveal a complete statement written in plain English, which was, "You are mine. Mine is stillness. Stillness is timeless. Timeless is eternal." And then it just stopped. It quickly made immediate logical sense to me that anything timeless is going to be something that never changes and will be perfectly still. The only new idea was that these qualities had anything to do with conscious awareness or mind. This was a new concept to me, since I had spent most of my life wondering if consciousness was a product of the brain or whether it had its own nature, let alone what its true nature of qualities really are. After a short while, it became clear that each of the concepts presented in the statement had direct opposites that were recognizable as real physical characteristics anyone can relate to. The opposite of stillness is motion. The opposite of timeless is time. The opposite of eternal is transient. And the opposite of mind is body. We all have transient bodies that die after we live out our lives in time and are constantly changing as we grow older. This makes sense. Also, everything physical in its state of motion, since even the atoms that make up all things are made of spinning bodies, and therefore anything sitting still in front of us, like a cup of coffee, is in fact made of things that are in constant motion. With this recognition, the word process all came to my mind and led to the conclusion that processing, which takes time, is a quality of thinking, the thing we use our brains for. Duality, that is, duality logic, naturally states that both aspects exist simultaneously as 2 aspects of one whole, like the observer and the observed. Their oppositions must be extreme in its qualities, like black and white, or they will not truly be opposites. If the opposite of time is timeless, or t equals 0, the opposite of space is simply no space, or 0-dimensional, with no physical measure. No measure means there is no dimension or time or physical size. The apparent duality interpretation that caused confusion in those who sought to understand, but became clear as a natural difference between manifest and unmanifest aspects of the same single reality. In other words, both the singular reality of being, that is, the observer, and the manifest physical world, the observed, are based on the same singular truth. This is how understanding the nature of self can be achieved from gaining measure of the manifest world. They're directly connected as opposites in a natural relationship with each other. René Descartes, the 18th century French philosopher, emerged from the Renaissance period as the father of modern philosophy, promoting the same duality concept. The only problem he seemed to encounter was in trying to explain the relationship between the physical body and its potential non-physical conscious source. It did recognize the pineal gland as the seat of the soul, but could not come up with a mechanism to explain how non-physical consciousness could affect the physical body. We might only say a person's will gives rise to physical muscular responses and actions. However, relying on subjective impulses is arbitrarily and impossible to pin down objectively. In Hindu tradition, this same duality treatment is depicted and solved in the union of Shiva, which is consciousness, and Shakti as being energy. Their union is the very issue of becoming self-realized. This is how Richard Alper of Aldous Huxley and Timothy Leary Association, who became known as Ramdas, described the union of Shiva and Shakti. Quote, as energy, the universe is referred to as Shakti, and the Father, that which is identified in the formless is referred to Shiva. The path of enlightenment is the path of bringing together the two parts of this identity until form is no different than formless. A being who has merged into that identity, clinging nowhere to form, neither here nor there to neither this nor that, is said to be realized, which is the ultimate union of the mother and father. The process of bringing about that union involves working with Shakti, the mother, directing and using the energy and form in order to transcend that form and merge with the formless. Any process of thinking is an act of refinement that leads to a state of understanding or knowing, hopefully. Ultimately, deep inquiry leads to complete understanding, like reaching the top of a mountain with a total view of what was drowned below. What we have focused on and put our faith in has grown into a mountain which we can stand on. By using the brain, the goal of the mind seems to be to understand its own oneness. It is self-referent. In other words, reiterating the great advantage to know thyself as the very purpose of physical existence. Out of the dual relationships, the one between time and timeless struck me as the most interesting. I then tried to build a visual picture of the qualities of timelessness in terms that would allow me to view in my mind's eye as many of the characteristics at once. It was easier to do this than to have lots of different concepts floating around individually. This took me 3 days of trying different approaches to the thought spirit until I got it. Timelessness was represented as a thin surface of white paint on a flat vertical surface, like a wall that was out there. That was not there, It was just a sponge of white paint dried in place as an analogy to the stillness and unchanging qualities associated with zero dimension. Time and energy, in contrast, was a set of simple hair-like waves emanating out into the space away from the white surface. I thought of time as the means to express the contents of the timeless fullness, bit by bit, as if spirit itself were being stretched out in time to be known to itself in its opposite physical nature. They both relied on each other, and yet, because the timeless aspect is eternal, it exists a priority, as it were, and is in the lead. It is more important that the physical world, in a way, being timeless and infinite as a source and conclusion. So here is a single root generating its opposite that allows the root to understand itself by interacting with its own outer manifestation. In so doing, the observer discovers the nature of their own inner divine fullness. When the observer consciously truly understands the unification of the two primordial opposite issues of singular nature as a cynical duality. As a cyclical duality, like the chicken and egg dichotomy. They experience every aspect of singular nature instantly, from a tiny singularity at the center of the head all the way out to the infinite expanse in a single timeless moment of sudden subjective expansion that amounts to a non-physical infinite pulse. As the logical end of the range of observatory nature, that is, the infinite pulse as a unifying experiential event is the personal experience, as the personal equivalent to moving at the speed of light, where all length and time dilate suddenly, contracting instantly to zero. It takes no time to get anywhere at light speed because for light there is no time. The universe disappears subjectively as the observer experiences the timelessness of light for a short period, what seems like 10 minutes. The instant I understood the chicken and the egg cycle as a single process of spirit and energy feeding each other, my mind suddenly slipped as if on a piece of ice, and the world spun out of control for a moment, making my surroundings like the inside of a bright eggshell the size of a stadium. A scroll that is beige in color suddenly burst out of a point a few inches in front of my point of view, going to the left and right simultaneously at an increasing speed. Incredible speed. It was too fast. The scroll bolted out as if its full extension was instantaneous, but continuously poured out its source point, even though it seemed to reach its destination already. The first impression of its appearance was that of a bow tie unraveling from a single point too small to see, becoming a scroll in extension. I then turned and looked down its length to the left to see where it was going and could clearly see the vanishing point it was heading to in the far distance. As it's very hard to describe the change in awareness at this moment other than to say the following events happened on top of each other without hesitation, as if the whole event existed at once, but I could experience each part individually and subsequently in what seemed like time at my own pace, albeit quick. Timelessness is a very strange thing to a awareness that has only known process in logical sequences that takes time. My curiosity in the scroll and the surface content brought my gaze back to it from the vanishing point and realized that if I follow the speed of the scroll in its direction of movement, I could perhaps gain a snapshot view of its surface and find out if anything was on it that might be interesting. When I did this, the surface portion I followed showed a upper half of bright white and lower half of bright gold that stayed in place at the scroll continued to rush along. Then my eyes switched off suddenly as if a shutter came down behind them and everything went black, followed immediately by an instant and sudden vast expansion as if my body was now an expanding spherical bubble exploding outward as a bewildering speed from a point inside my head. I went flying upward and out of my body, backwards as though I had been grabbed by the scruff of my neck from above and suddenly pulled billions of miles out into the empty space. Almost immediately there was perfect stillness. The experience was far more exhilarating than frightening. In fact, there was no fear involved at all, only excitement and amazement of what effectively is touching timelessness, which is super fast. It is as bizarre as it sounds and yet feels completely natural. The only awareness now was of a black void in all directions. This space was completely empty, and I could immediately sense its vacuity while perceiving its ultra darkness and transparency. The void seemed to go on into the vast distance without end. There was no visible boundary whatsoever. Then I tried to look around, but as I looked to looked to my upper left, or thought I did, I found the view did not change. As if the initiative view followed my gaze, and realized I had no idea if it was turning at all or if I could. There was no mention reference to contrast my position to prove it. As I wondered what to do and where my body had gone, a thin membrane like oil on water appeared around me in the shape of my head and shoulders. I could see the head was still turned to the left relative to the shoulders and wished for it to turn back to the straightforward view. It worked, and as the head swept around to the right to line up with the shoulders, something unexpected came into view in the near distance that appeared to be 6 thin horizontal streaks of light. They held their positions relative to mine and extended beyond my preferential vision further over to the right. As I followed their length, turning to the right, they led to a large white cumulus type cloud that looked like a real cotton wool type cloud we would normally see in the summer day. From its body, a series of thin white laser-like beams of light extended out into the black void around it, making the overall shape of a cross, with 2 beams extending out of the front towards me, making 32 in total. Every beam was the same, extending a distance roughly 10 times the cloud length before each seemed to fade into the blackness, spreading out slightly at their limit as smears of light and 3 fingers at the end of a long arm. My first thought after the stunning introduction was that it could not be real. I thought there was something wrong with my vision because I was looking for a point source of light in the distance somewhere and did not expect to see a cloud. Turning to look away into the darkness again to the left for a moment to test my vision, I waited about 3 seconds before turning around to look again to the right where the cloud had been. It was still just sitting there, gleaming white. Nothing had changed. It might be real, I thought, and there was nothing I could do about it. Wondering what it was, I asked myself, what is it? And instantly found myself in a position more than halfway towards the cloud, but a little higher and to the right from where I had just been. I had to turn to look down to the left from this new position and could see over the top of the cloud, the right-hand side and in front end of all at once. Now I knew I could move around at will, but held my position for a while as I gazed at the cloud in amazement, looking up and down its upper surface, thinking of why I was looking at a cloud that is normally made of water vapor. I mentally wrote the word timeless over its upper surface to remind myself of the understanding that got me there and stayed in that position for a good minute or so in disbelief. Wishing to take a closer look at the cloud surface, I found myself instantly in front of its face, about 10 feet away, that is. At this close range, the surface still looked like a cloud and gave up no secrets, leaving me with the conclusion that I wouldn't learn anything more from being so close to it. Looking directly up from my position next, I could see the beams extending from the top of the cloud surface above looked like searchlight beams. That is, pointing in slightly different angles and frozen in place. Thinking to examine the beams closer, I found I was moving upward, slowly this time, before stopping to look around across the upper surface from this point of view. You got to understand, this is all Phil. He's at this place in Cambodia, and he is basically his pineal gland is having effect, although the pituitary gland is also involved here in his head. There were 10 beams emerging from the upper surface in 3 rows of 3 beams each, going from front to back with a single beam at the back on the left. The triple rows were arranged with the same configuration as the 3 belt stars of the constellation being Orion, I noticed. Then it occurred to study just one of the beams as I looked around to quickly choose the one on my left at the front corner, moving away from the beam at first to take it all in at once. I looked at it, and I looked up and down from its base to the limit. There was no haze around the transition between the beams and the surrounding black space, giving it a razor sharp definition. It was so perfectly straight and sharply defined. It looked like there was a corner running all the way up and down the beam, so its edges, to make sure I looked down at where the beams came out of the cloud, and it was in fact circular at its base. Confirming the apparent cornering was a visual effect of the razor sharp definition of the beam itself. Then, to get a very, very close look, I instantly moved right up to the beam, making it apparent width about 15 feet at a distance from me that seemed to be about 10 feet again. The beam was pure crystal white, solid looking, and radiant with no apparent distinctions in its appearance whatsoever. I gazed into it, trying to see if there was anything other than just pure white radiance, and couldn't detect anything at all. With that, I looked directly down from my position towards the surface of the cloud below, about 100 feet away, it seemed, and noticed that all the beams at the surface were surrounded by a perfect circle as the cloud surface neatly and smoothly curved down around them, creating a hole from which the beams projected and fitted snugly. Being satisfied that I couldn't learn anything more, I moved away from the cloud to a similar position as before, where I could take it all in at once, and had the sense that it was nearing time to leave the situation somehow. Finally, my attention turned yet again to the cloud's surface from the secondary position I had taken at the start of the experience. I had expected to be able to see its fine detail earlier when I approached the front at such close range, but instead now found that circular lenses appear between myself and the cloud, automatically zooming in onto one of the tiny bumps of the cloud surface, much to my surprise. Magnified, the bump now looked like a very neatly packed ponytail bundle curling out of and back into the surface of what immediately reminded me of a clump of pure snowy white human hair. Each strand in this bundle was the same in width and length, giving a very neat and tidy appearance as it curved out and back into the surface next to other fiber bundles going in other directions. The entire surface was crisscrossed with these fibrous bundles, like it was a high-tech beard made of packed insulated wires, forming a neat and tidy, impossible Gordian knot that looked like a cloud at the large scale. The hair-like appearance made me think of God's big white beard, and later the body of a sheep or lamb, even a boat with oars protruding from its hull. It became obvious where these religious concepts originated. With that, as I continued to gaze in the cloud's hair-like bundle, my eyesight faded back within a second of time, and I was again aware of the room I was in before I had disappeared into the void of abyss. The sense of my body came back somewhat, and I felt very calm and still, with no desire to move or speak. I couldn't speak at first. Anyway, that was a surprise. I had nothing to say, but did try to speak at one point and open my mouth. Nothing came out. So I gave up on that idea, and it took 4 hours to be able to get up from the chair I had sat in during the 3 days of constant contemplation and thought experiments, and then took a few more days to come back to a state where the world and its norms could be dealt with again. The most prominent issue that kept flooding my mind in general after this event was the idea of climbing a mountain as a metaphor for reaching a state of greater understanding as we get higher. The view behind us slowly expands with our increasing awareness. It's not until we reach the top, however, that the scene on the other side of the mountain comes into view for the first time. We realize in a unified view that we are not physical fundamentally, but needed the physical world as a defining contrast to figure it out. And that is the conclusion of chapter 2 tonight of the book on the origins of Gnosis. So I just wanted to, again, just appreciate you being here. Thank you for your listening attention, and I wish you a good night, and you take care.